one of the things that I say often is that we all have mental health issues. Some of us may have a diagnosis and some of us don't. But it's all of us that are going to go through a time where maybe we have repetitive negative thoughts, or we can't sleep, or we're ruminating about something that's making us anxious. That's part of the human condition. And when we started the Center for Mental Health in the Workplace, we were really looking at that person with a diagnosis, and there's a duty to accommodate. And what we started to understand is that workplaces often create the circumstances that have a negative impact on the mental health of people with or without diagnoses. And that if we went a little bit further upstream and started to think about what is a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, we could prevent some of the worst exposures to trauma. But there's a whole other piece to this, and that is this idea of, do you qualify? Have you earned the right to say that you've been traumatized? And this is really problematic for me, because if I see someone who can't sleep, if I see someone who has a hard time focusing, someone who is in this hypervigilant state all the time, I don't care what the diagnosis is. This person needs some support, they need some help. I have a friend who is in the Department of National Defense, and so there was a bunch of us standing around talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and some of the atrocities of war. And I said, well, why is it that all soldiers don't end up with PTSD? Because they see some really horrible things. They experience a lot of horrible things. And the one soldier who had been diagnosed, he said to me, my theory is that switch that goes on when you're afraid turns on and it doesn't turn off. He said, for me, when I'm sitting on a beach and there's a string, I immediately think it's going to be a tripwire and I get very agitated. He said, my family doesn't want to be around me anymore. It's just too exhausting for them. And he said, and at this point, we were sitting in a public place, and he said, do you see that? I said, see what? He said, that there, and he's pointing at a knapsack. And I said, yeah. And he said, I can't talk to you anymore. I can't focus until that young man that left the knapsack comes back, because I'm worried that it's going to explode. And I saw the young man obviously looking for a friend or something, and never thought anything about it until he pointed it out for me. So then the next piece of this is looking at how far and to what extent people have to go to get well again. And a lot of the treatments that they had for post-traumatic stress disorder were not effective for the majority of people, or they seemed to take a long, long time for people to recover. So what we started to think about was, what if we go back a little bit and think about the employer's responsibility, to think about what we could do to prevent some of the worst effects. And the good doctor here talked about some of the things. Resilience is not something that you are just born with. Resilience is something that can be developed. And we started to understand that these same factors that build resilience, that are going to lessen the impact of exposure to trauma, are the factors that also can prevent burnout. And we were looking at what burnout is, and of course, again, burnout had a bit of a PR problem because people said it's not real. There's been research since then where they say that the cortisol levels for people with depression are through the roof, and the cortisol levels for people with burnout are actually almost zero. And that what is happening with burnout is people who also are not having good boundaries, right? They're not eating well, they're not sleeping well, often they're those overachievers who just throw themselves into their work. But then when something happens, and in the work that we were doing and talking to people with burnout, there was a really strange phenomenon that they were reporting to us, is that they were often these overachievers, really dedicated people working really hard, and then somebody questioned their integrity, or they humiliated them, or they betrayed them. And this mini trauma, if you will, caused them to fold like a house of cards. Now, many of them never even took time off work. They kept working, but the energy level that they had was so depleted that it felt like they were just going through the motions. Again, does this qualify? Do they deserve any of our support if it's just burnout and it's their own fault because they didn't have good boundaries? My answer from a workplace is that the employer's responsibility is not to become a mental health expert. It is not to offer you advice about your psychological well-being. In fact, that's not even ethical. If you are someone who's qualified, you would never do therapy on your employees because you have a power relationship. So we don't want employers to become mental health experts, but we do know that in the same way, employers are responsible to protect employees from other hazards in the workplace. You're not going to expose them to chemicals in the air. You're not going to expose them to tripping hazards. Neither should you unnecessarily expose them to psychological injuries. So where does that go? We started to look at some of the ways that employers could do this without getting into your toilet training, without getting into your childhood traumas, without getting into your psyche. Do it in a way that works. And there's 3 real categories. One of them is that the more that we can anticipate, and that's why I think it's interesting that you chose blindsided, the more that we can anticipate what we're going to be exposed to by talking to people who have been there, who have done that, by really as a group sitting around thinking, okay, worst case scenario, what are we going to be exposed to? What do you think that's going to feel like? How are we going to manage that? What are the things that we need to put in place? It may never happen, that particular conversation, that particular exposure, but being able to talk about those things will significantly reduce your exposure. That soldier, and I said, why do you think some people don't get PTSD? He said, I think if you go across the wire, so into the theater of war, thinking that you're going to be a hero, that you're going to save people, that you're going to make a positive difference in the world, he said, I think you're much more likely to have PTSD than if you say, my work includes doing things that compromise my values, doing things that go against my integrity. It includes seeing things that I can't unsee, but I have thought about it and it's my job and I'm willing to do that. He said, I think those people who are prepared, who are realistic about what it is, are less likely to end up with trauma. So this isn't scientific evidence, but it is what I hear from people out there and what they're experiencing. So the first thing is really preparation, talking about things. And I've had employers say, well, I don't want my staff to talk about things that could go wrong because, you know, we're opening up that can of worms. I said to one of the leaders in the Department of National Defense, why don't you talk to your recruits about this? And he said, because we wouldn't have as many recruits. Well, I don't think that's enough for me. But this idea that we can prepare, that we can think about it, that we can help people to know what they may be exposed to and what it'll feel like means that we're not going to have that sense in the moment of real fear. The next one is the ability to both give and receive social support. This is really interesting because in the group that we're talking to about burnout, the majority of them were great at giving social support. How can I help? What can I do? I want to be there for you. No, I'll get that done for you. But they were not very good at accepting social support or reaching out for it. And if we in the workplace really want to be able to do these jobs that are much more of a psychological drain, then let's inoculate ourselves against it. Let's learn how to look out for each other. Let's learn how to say, of course I'm going to need help sometimes. That's not a character flaw. It is about being prepared. It is about saying, I want to be good at doing what I can do for as long as I can, and therefore I need the people around me to be able to notice when I don't notice. I need the people around me to say, don't give me your BS. I know that you're struggling. Let's talk about this. And these things can be done in a workplace in a way that doesn't get too personal, that is focused on the work and how we do it. And then there's one other piece that really struck home for me and around resilience, and it's that ability to keep things in perspective. Romeo Dallaire, when he talks about Rwanda, he says one of the hardest things for him was that he knew he could have done more, but he was told to stand down. That idea of intentional cruelty, or that idea that we're being blamed or shamed, that we could have or should have done something more, or that somebody else could have or should have done something more, is a piece that will really go that tape in our head over and over again. And the more we can learn to put things in perspective, the more we can learn that, for the most part, people are doing the best they can with what they have. And what I say is, when I watch someone who does something that is completely against my sense of values, my sense of integrity, and I look back over their life, I think, if I had lived their life and experienced what they experienced, I might have done very similar things. So that you can say it is what it is. I'm not going to go there, and I don't have to go there. But you can then let it go. You can not hold on to it, thinking all humanity is like a couple of people that may have done really horrible things. That all humanity, for the most part, are more well-intentioned. Because if we focus on that one negative or evil person or event, and it colors everything in our world, we just start to feel like there's nothing, there's no hope. So, in terms of the workplace, we want to build resilience by helping people to prepare for and to learn that they can problem solve almost any challenge. And they learn that by the people who have done it. We want to increase the ability to give and receive social support in the workplace, peer support programs or other ways. And we also want to learn to put things in perspective, which is really a level of emotional intelligence about other people and their motives.